A simple woman was handcuffed unjustly by corrupt officers who arrested her just for being a woman, but what they didn't know was that the quiet, humble woman they were humiliating in public was actually an undercover FBI agent, and what she did to them left the whole country speechless. It happened on a dusty afternoon, in a forgotten part of town, where assumptions ran faster than facts. She was walking with nothing but a small tote bag, just a face among strangers, when a cruiser slowed beside her. One officer leaned out the window, scanning her face with the type of squint that meant he'd already made up his mind. A second later, the door swung open, and without asking her name, without checking her ID, they were on her. "We got her. Hands where I can see, M." She blinked, stunned, clutching her wallet. "I think you have the wrong person." "I haven't, you fit the description," he snapped, already twisting her arms behind her back. "What description?" she asked, voice trembling. "White, dirty clothes, walking like you got something to hide," the officer mocked, grinning. She tried to show them her identification, tried to explain. But they laughed. They pushed her against the hood of the car. People stopped to watch. Phones were raised. She heard someone mutter, "Another crazy one pretending to be somebody." That moment was etched into her skin like a burn, being reduced to nothing, treated as a threat, silenced in broad daylight, accused of being someone she wasn't, while the truth sat inches away in her bag, completely ignored. But what no one realized, not the cops, not the onlookers, not the precinct that processed her without question, is that the woman they humiliated, dismissed, and mocked was not just another civilian. She was part of a federal operation targeting deep corruption. And the moment they locked her up, they unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would destroy careers, end reputations, and bring a corrupt system crashing to its knees. Because she hadn't been sent there by mistake. She had been watching them. Investigating. Waiting. And they had just given her everything she needed. Now the question is, when justice comes disguised as weakness, who will survive the fallout? Are you ready to find out what happened next? Before we begin, we wish you a powerful and unforgettable story experience. If you enjoy real-life inspired dramas full of justice, emotion, and epic turnarounds, make sure to subscribe to our channel Hope Threads. Now, take a breath. And get ready. Her name was Rachel Whitmore. 37 years old, born and raised in a small, conservative town just outside Madison, Wisconsin. She carried herself with quiet restraint, the kind that doesn't demand space but commands attention anyway. Tall, lean, often dressed in neutral colors and second-hand denim, she didn't look like much, at least not to those who only glanced. Her face was clean, never made up, and her dirty blonde hair was almost always tied in a tight bun, the way women do when they want nothing in the way of their thoughts. Rachel had learned early in life that silence was more useful than noise. And invisibility, when used right, could be a weapon. She was the kind of woman most people didn't notice in a crowd, and that was by design. She had made a life out of disappearing in plain sight. To the residents of her modest apartment complex on the edge of town, she was just the lady in 3B. Paid her rent on time. Worked odd hours. Always polite, always quiet. Never had visitors. No loud music. No boyfriend, no girlfriend, no family nearby. People respected her distance but didn't think much about her. She worked, she came home, and that was the extent of her story as far as the neighborhood was concerned. What they didn't know, what no one knew, is that behind those thin apartment walls and beneath that quiet stare, Rachel lived a life double-wrapped in layers of secrecy. Because she wasn't just some Midwestern woman working freelance jobs to pay her bills. Rachel was a seasoned field operative with the FBI, currently embedded in one of the Bureau's most delicate domestic corruption investigations in years, one that had led her straight to the Madison Police Department. But this chapter of her life didn't begin with guns or chase scenes or undercover disguises. It began with spreadsheets. Reports. Patterns. Complaints buried and rewritten. Whistleblowers silenced. And a growing mountain of internal affairs documents that had, over the years, revealed something far more sinister than incompetence. The officers at Precinct 42 had a habit of targeting vulnerable individuals, especially women alone, fabricating charges, intimidating witnesses, and falsifying police reports. What made it worse was how casually it was done. They didn't even try to hide it. The pattern was cold, calculated, and efficient. Victims were silenced before they could speak. When they did speak, they weren't believed. And those who tried to challenge the system were either bought off or buried in legal tactics so aggressive they eventually disappeared. Rachel had been quietly feeding data to her superiors for months. She never met her contact in person. Every exchange was encrypted. Every move had to be calculated. Because one wrong step, one suspicious conversation, one file downloaded at the wrong hour, and she would be exposed. It wasn't just her job on the line. It was her safety. The department she was investigating wasn't just corrupt. It was connected. Deep. Officers with ties to business owners, local judges, even one or two state legislators. And Rachel had learned something else about the kind of power men like that hold: it doesn't shout. It whispers. It threatens without words. It makes you question what you saw. Makes you doubt your instincts. Until you surrender to its silence. But Rachel never surrendered. She kept building her case. Week after week, gathering testimony, financial records, traffic stop videos that had never made it into the system. And when she was finally ready, when the pieces were finally falling into place, her bureau contact asked her to delay. Just a few more days. They were coordinating a federal warrant. Timing was everything. Rachel understood that. What she didn't know was that, in those few days of waiting, everything would change. It happened on a Wednesday. The air was thick with early summer heat, the kind that makes the pavement shimmer. Rachel had taken a short walk through a neighborhood she didn't usually frequent. It wasn't part of her cover, but it wasn't far enough from her usual routes to raise concern. She had received a tip the night before, a small one, just a whisper, that one of the officers under investigation had ties to a local housing scam. She didn't want to wait. She needed to verify the address, maybe snap a quick picture. That was it. No confrontation. No conversations. Just eyes and notes. She hadn't even been on the block for 10 minutes when she noticed the patrol car. It didn't slow right away. But when it did, her stomach tightened. She kept walking. Neutral pace. Don't look nervous. Don't run. That's what they always say. But she knew. She knew before she even heard the door slam behind her. "Hey," a voice barked. "Stop right there." She turned slowly, her hand already moving toward her back pocket for her ID. She kept it ready for situations just like this. "Sir, I'm not doing anything wrong. Here's my identification," she said, calm, controlled. But the officer didn't take it. Didn't even look at it. "We got a report of a woman matching your description casing properties around here. You got any reason to be on this street?" His tone wasn't curious. It was a trap. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed. This wasn't standard procedure. Not even bad policing. This was intentional. She glanced at the second officer stepping out from the passenger side. His hand rested on his belt, just near the cuffs. She repeated herself. More forcefully this time. "I'm not under arrest. You have no cause." The first officer snorted. "You want to try resisting? Go ahead. You fit the description." Rachel's heart was thudding now. "What description?" she asked again. He took a step closer. White, mid-30s, alone, walking where she shouldn't be. That's enough. Before she could say another word, the cuffs were on. Tight. Aggressive. She was shoved toward the car. No Miranda rights. No explanation. She tried once more to speak, but her voice was drowned out by a sudden burst of laughter from one of the officers. "You know, you all think you're untouchable," he muttered. "Always got something to say. But out here, you say the wrong thing, you end up in the wrong cell." Rachel said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. Not in that moment. Not with her face pressed against the window, her arms twisted behind her back, and the weight of a city's silence settling over her like a shroud. By the time she reached the station, she was just another suspect. Paperwork was filled out without her input. Her ID was misplaced. She asked to make a phone call and was told she had to wait. An officer offered her a bottle of water but made a comment about women playing spy games under his breath. It didn't matter that she kept repeating who she was. It didn't matter that she asked, then demanded, to speak with a supervisor. The people around her didn't care. Or worse, they knew and didn't care. Because in this place, authority was a weapon. And Rachel was its target. Hours passed. Her wrists ached. Her pride was gone. Her cover was hanging by a thread. And yet, in the quiet of that cell, something inside her began to shift. Not rage. Not fear. Something sharper. Colder. It was the realization that this moment, was exactly what she needed. Not because she deserved it. But because they did. She had walked into their world hoping to expose it from the shadows. But now she had been pulled into the center. The abuse wasn't secondhand anymore. It was hers. And that made the story stronger. The evidence sharper. And her resolve, unbreakable. She didn't know yet how it would end. But she knew one thing with a clarity so fierce it burned: she would not leave that station in silence. And when she finally walked out, however long it took, the people who put her there wouldn't just lose their jobs. They would lose everything. The clock on the wall of the station ticked louder with every second Rachel remained seated in that holding cell. Her hands still throbbed from the cuffs, her back stiff from the metal bench, and though her face was blank, her mind was an inferno of calculations. The humiliation had settled deep, not just as pain but as fuel. She had long stopped expecting an apology. That would never come. What mattered now was what came next. She had stopped talking hours ago. Her requests had been ignored, her ID not returned, her voice dismissed again and again. The last words from Officer Hayes, murmured to a colleague like a private joke, still rang in her ears: maybe next time she won't mouth off. They didn't just humiliate her. They believed they could do it without consequence. But what they didn't know, what none of them even considered, was that by refusing to verify her identity, by processing her under a false name, by holding her without cause, they had opened the door to something much bigger than anything they had faced before. Her arrest had triggered a silent alarm embedded in the Bureau's classified network. A backup protocol only activated under one condition: operative compromise. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't public. But it was immediate. The second Rachel missed 2 scheduled check-ins and failed to verify a third identity confirmation, the Bureau started pulling strings. Quietly. Surgically. The first to arrive wasn't a team. It was a man in a gray suit, holding a thin briefcase, asking for the chief of police with a federal badge tucked beneath his coat. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He handed over a letter, printed on FBI stationery and sealed with a red-coated watermark. Within it, a warrant. Within the warrant, names: officers under investigation for abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Rachel Whitmore's name was at the top of the document. Not as a suspect. As a special agent. Back inside the precinct, the officers remained oblivious. Rachel sat still as she heard the murmurs grow louder outside her cell. Heavy footsteps. A shift in tone. The sound of radios clicking into silence. Then the door opened. Not the one to her cell. The one leading to the main floor. A voice echoed across the hallway. "Where is the woman you processed earlier today? The one booked without charges?" No one answered. Then came the second voice, steady, cold, unmistakably calm. "Her name is Special Agent Rachel Whitmore. You're holding a federal agent under false pretenses." Rachel didn't react at first. She waited. Waited for the sound of that lock. And when it came, slow and deliberate, she finally stood up. The door creaked open. The officer on the other side was no longer smirking. His face was pale. The man in the suit stepped forward. "Ma'am, your team is outside. We're ready." Rachel walked out without a word. Her eyes met Officer Hayes briefly. He was frozen in place, a file still in his hand. She didn't blink. Didn't speak. Just kept walking as murmurs followed her down the corridor. What came next was not vengeance, it was precision. Every file, every internal report Rachel had submitted, every audio recording from the locker room she'd secretly bugged, every shred of data, it had all been activated. The Bureau had prepared for this moment, even if Rachel never believed it would actually happen. They swarmed the building. Not with guns drawn, but with subpoenas. With agents in suits collecting hard drives. With IT teams disconnecting servers. The Madison Police Department was being seized from the inside. Not with violence, but with evidence. Hayes and the others were made to sit. To answer questions. To explain why their paperwork didn't match. Why their body cams were off. Why several reports had been digitally altered. It wasn't long before the officers began turning on each other. Under pressure, the stories crumbled. Officer Klein admitted to falsifying 3 charges. Officer Wallace confessed he'd seen Hayes rough up suspects more than once. The camera footage, once thought deleted, was recovered and decrypted. It showed more than anyone expected. Including Rachel's arrest, the way she was manhandled, ignored, ridiculed. The video spread before the Bureau even released a statement. And when it reached the public, it exploded. A press conference was held 2 days later. The Bureau stood behind Rachel as she gave her statement, poised, professional, eyes steady. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't seek revenge in her tone. Only truth. "The system only works if we hold ourselves accountable," she said. "And for too long, too many have used their uniforms as shields instead of service. That ends today." Still, not everyone accepted it. Protesters gathered in support of the arrested officers. Anonymous threats were sent to Rachel's inbox. But the tide was shifting. Because when the footage aired nationwide, when the headlines called her the agent they tried to erase, the world listened. Not because she was extraordinary, but because her story echoed the experiences of too many. And because she had proof. In the following weeks, as the department was dismantled, Rachel didn't return to her apartment. The Bureau reassigned her. Temporarily. There were hearings, court dates, and internal panels. But she never stopped. Never backed away. The pain of what had happened had settled, but the purpose had grown stronger. She'd never expected to become the face of a fight this public, but now that she was, she wouldn't waste it. And yet, in the quiet of a hotel room days later, as she stared out over a city still simmering with tension, Rachel felt something else rising. Not satisfaction. Not relief. A question. A whisper that wouldn't leave her alone. If justice had finally arrived, why did it still feel like the war had just begun? The courthouse was packed. Not with spectators looking for scandal, but with reporters, legal experts, victims, and those who had never dared to come forward, until now. Rachel sat near the front, her posture straight, a plain navy blue suit hugging her frame. There was no badge on her chest, no visible sign of rank, but no one in that room mistook her for ordinary anymore. She had not only survived what happened, she had transformed it. In the months following the exposure of the Madison Police Department scandal, Rachel had worked behind the scenes, not for revenge, but to ensure that no single crack was left unrepaired. Dozens of reopened cases had led to dropped charges, exonerations, and in some cases, compensation to victims who had been wrongly imprisoned. But what truly marked the depth of her influence was the fact that officers, even in neighboring counties, had started to resign, knowing what was coming. Because Rachel hadn't just broken a department, she'd sparked a reckoning. Officer Hayes, the man who had pressed her face into the pavement and mocked her for talking too much, now sat across the room in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, no longer defiant. His lawyer had negotiated a plea deal to avoid trial, but the public humiliation was irreversible. The video had made him infamous nationwide. He lost not just his badge, but his pension, his home, and his community. Friends disappeared. Family avoided interviews. He lived now as a warning of what unchecked power, once exposed, could cost. As for Officer Klein, the one who had falsified evidence and tampered with internal files, he turned state's witness in a desperate attempt to reduce his sentence. He testified with a voice that trembled and eyes that never once met Rachel's. His cooperation spared him the longest sentence, but he was permanently banned from holding any law enforcement position again. He now worked manual labor in a warehouse outside the city, and his face had become synonymous with cowardice. Detective Wallace, the highest-ranking officer among the accused, had tried to flee. Days before the indictments were made public, he emptied his accounts and drove west. But he was intercepted before crossing state lines, arrested quietly at a rest stop, still clinging to the delusion that his badge had made him untouchable. The trial revealed that Wallace had buried over 20 complaints in the last decade, had intimidated witnesses, manipulated evidence, and ensured silence through fear. His conviction carried the weight of federal charges and state-level prosecution. He wouldn't see the outside of a prison for at least 35 years. And Rachel? Rachel didn't go back to her old life because there was no old life to return to. Her time undercover had changed her, and the betrayal she suffered had redefined her mission. The Bureau offered her a promotion, a desk in D.C., a prestigious position that would have removed her from the field and placed her among the suits. She declined. Politely, firmly, and without second thought. Instead, she requested reassignment to a task force focused on reforming internal accountability nationwide. Her name carried weight now. Not because of titles. Because she had lived the injustice she now worked to dismantle. She had spoken in congressional hearings, not as a symbol of victimhood, but as a blueprint for resilience. Lawmakers didn't just listen, they acted. Policies shifted. Body camera policies became mandatory in several states. External civilian review boards were formed. And whistleblower protection laws gained momentum in ways they never had before. The final moment of closure didn't come in court, though. It came on a quiet day, 6 months later, when Rachel returned, not to her old apartment, but to the neighborhood where it all began. The corner where she had been stopped. The sidewalk where she had been pinned. It was a simple act. She stood there for a moment, unnoticed, a coffee in one hand, a breath escaping her lips as the wind moved past. And then she walked. No fanfare. No audience. Just Rachel, finally moving through the world on her own terms. The woman who once lived quietly in 3B was no longer invisible. She was heard. And more importantly, she was believed. And now, take a moment. Breathe in everything you've just heard. Because this story, it's not just about one woman versus a broken system. It's about what happens when the quiet ones rise. When the underestimated speak. When injustice is recorded, exposed, and held accountable. It's about truth finding its way through silence. And the extraordinary strength that lives inside someone who refuses to let a moment of humiliation define them. So now, I ask you, how many stories go untold every day? How many truths stay buried because someone is too afraid, too ignored, or too alone to speak? What would justice look like if every Rachel had someone listening? Tell us in the comments, what part of Rachel's story hit you the hardest? And what do you think needs to change in the world we live in? If this story moved you, inspired you, made you feel, don't forget to subscribe to our channel Hope Threads for more stories that matter. And if you believe in truth, in justice, and in second chances, give this video a like. Your voice is part of the change.